as those investments begin to pay off, you kind of live from there and grow to achieve hopefully a great return. And that curve, as you may have doubted or guessed, looks like a J.
Hi, this is Abhilash Jayakumar, co-founder and managing director of Trust Vista. On today's Trust Vista Talk, I have the pleasure of being accompanied by Leon Brujis. Leon is a partner at Palladium Equity. Leon, thank you so much for joining me today.
Abhilash, thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this podcast for quite some time.
Before we talk about what you're doing at Palladium, what really strikes me is you've been with Palladium for over 15 years, and that's not something you typically see in this day and age with professions, unless you were the founder and you don't have really much of a choice but to stay there. But prior to that, you only had one other job, and that happened to be a firm called Lehman Brothers, which
that's right.
You left wasn't entirely voluntarily. Can you maybe talk to me a little bit about how you started your career in finance and that experience of starting at Lehman Brothers and how that translated to where you are now?
Absolutely, and thank you for bringing that up, because that is an important part of my story. So like every other male in my family, I grew up wanting to be an engineer. And while I was in school, I started in an internship in the technology division of another storied company called Fannie Mae. While I was at Fannie Mae, I realized that being an engineer or a technologist was not what I really wanted to do. And I networked myself into Fannie Mae's trading floor. While I was there, I was working double the time, but I was having a lot of fun. And I decided that a career in Wall Street was for me. And I went ahead and interviewed with all the Wall Street investment banks. And I had an offer to be a trader and an investment banker at Lehman Brothers. And at the time, I felt like being an investment banker at Lehman Brothers was my calling. And as I like to say, I switched to the dark side and moved over to finance and started my career at Lehman Brothers. My career at Lehman Brothers was very formative and set me on the path that I am now. And I have only good things to say about being there. I actually left Fannie Mae before it went into conservatorship. And I left Lehman Brothers in 2007 before what happened. So my timing has been good.
So we can say they fell apart because you left them then.
I wouldn't give myself so much credit, but better lucky than good, as they say.
So you've been in finance as a career for so long, but Lehman Brothers was 2 year, the typical analyst program. At what point of joining Palladium did you realize that this is where you'd be? Right? And certainly, in your early 20s, I can't imagine that you joined Palladium thinking you'd be there 15 years later.
That's right. I did not join Palladium thinking it was going to be almost 16-year stint. And to be honest with you, earlier in my career, I had some doubts as to whether I was going to stay or not. However, I would say 3 years in, it was a pivotal moment for me. And actually, it segues nicely to our conversation of this podcast. And my career at Palladium changed completely from what it was to what it became. And at that point, so it wasn't not for year one, but in year 3, that I started on a path at Palladium that I think has taken me to where I am today, where it kind of became a great home for me to stay in for a long period of time.
In the context of private equity, there's this concept of the J curve, right?
Absolutely.
With time period in which you can realize your results. So in that time period, you can invest and you can, not be worried about the current income, if it were, as it were, or the current value, but really towards how is this going to help my future situation from an investment perspective. But in the context of an individual's development or career, right? How does having a vision towards what the future is help you shape what it is you do today?
So I would credit my parents for this, but I've always had a long-term thinking mentality, and I think it's just the way I grew up and the way my life developed that I've had that long-term thinking mentality. And I would say only recently I understood the benefit it brought to me. But before I continue to this, for our audience, let's talk about what the J curve is from an investment perspective. So usually when you invest in private equity, there is your first few years or first few months, however you define your time period, it's a moment of investing, a moment of change for the company as they get used to institutional ownership. And that usually causes a drag either on earnings or on your return. And at least for a period, you kind of go into what's called a negative territory. But then as those investments begin to pay off, you kind of live from there and grow to achieve hopefully a great return. And that curve, as you may have doubt or guessed, looks like a J. And it's um, it's a great way for investors to understand and be prepared to face the challenges that come with an investment in the initial phases as you go through these changes that are very important. So now let's move towards what you and I want to talk about, which is why is this important to everyone's life and career, right? And when I joined, the partner that hired me at Palladium told me private equity is a long-term business. And this is very important, if you give me enough time, I'm going to teach you the business of private equity. So that really that really gave me that mentality of, okay, these investments are years long, and you have to have that long-term mentality in order to achieve these investments. It's not private equity is almost the opposite of trading. Daily changes have little to do with it, and it's more long-term changes that have the real impact. And so what I think I understood early on, which has helped me tremendously in my career, is to think about long-term goals and think about where you want to be from the long term, and then create the habits and small daily changes that will put you in the position to achieve those goals over the long term. You should think about the habits and the little changes today are the enabling things that allow you to get to your long-term goals in the future. Let me pause there and pass it back to you.
Really, when you're talking about the J curve, this idea of being mentally prepared for the dip, right? And if you can have an objective that's further out, that is what allows you to steel yourself against, the short term, looking left and looking right and seeing things going, sideways in the short term, but saying, no, that doesn't matter, right? Practically living through that, though, right? How does one stay focused on the end game?
I think it's important to understand, you mentioned this earlier, and I talked about this in our podcast, the emotional component of it. In a recent podcast I was on, I talked about the fact that one of the smartest guys ever to walk this earth, Isaac Newton, got caught in an investment bubble. When he was as part of his investment portfolio, he got so if someone like Newton can get caught up, all of us can get caught up. And so the emotional J curve works something like this, and this is not a framework I came up with, but I'm gonna quote it, which is, whenever you start any endeavor, professional or personal, presumably you want to do it, and but you don't know what you don't know, so you have what's called uninformed optimism. And that uninformed optimism is necessary to get you started. Very soon, you encounter what's called uninformed pessimism. You realize that it's going to be a lot more work, it's going to take a lot more time, and it's just more difficult than you originally anticipated. Then comes the toughest part, which is the valley of despair. Why did I get into this? How am I going to get out of this? Should I quit? And that's the toughest part. And I would say that's where, if you look at the cemetery, that's where most entrepreneurs are buried. That's where, a lot of great careers that could have been are buried. And once you get through that, you get to informed optimism, and then you get to the promised land. Okay? And so understanding that process, and that's the process we all go through when we're learning. And investments is about learning, career development is about learning, understanding that you're going to go through those phases, and there's virtually nothing you can do about it to avoid it, will mentally prepare you to get through that mental J curve and the J curve in life to accomplish anything great.
Yeah. The challenge for a lot of young people when you think about setting a long-term goal is the further out you go, the more, opaque the reality becomes, right? And a lot of people say, how will I know what I want to do 10 years from now or 20 years from now? I don't know what I want to do 5 years from now. So that just paralyzes them, and they don't think about what they may want to do, right? And they just do things in the short term because it becomes hard to think about it, right? And what I often, how I frame it for individuals is, don't think that you need to have 100% conviction on what it is you want to do in the long term. Think about all the possibilities you might pursue, and of all those possibilities, which one seems the most likely in the moment, and pursue that with 100% conviction, right? And if one day you wake up and you have more conviction on some other theory, then you can redirect yourself, as you did with engineering to finance, right? And
that's right. And so let me tell you one of my favorite all-time quotes, which is, plans are worthless, but planning is everything. Okay? And you're right. I think that you should never be so rigid with your thinking that the goal is so specific that if you don't get exactly what you wanted, that would be a disappointment. You'll do a disservice to yourself by doing that. I do think, however, like you said, you should have a direction. Whenever you're looking for a job or for an interview, is the worst answer you can give is, what do you want to do? Whatever. That's the worst answer. You want to have, to use the boating analogy, you want to sail east or you want to sail west, and you want to have a direction, but you want to allow yourself a band where you can deviate as life happens. Because like you said, I didn't go into engineering knowing that I was going to go into finance, but then I pivoted along the way. But having the plan provides a path for you to follow, and throughout this path, you're going to find obstacles, but, and another quote that I'm going to say, the obstacle is the way.
Yeah. I had a very similar journey to you in a lot of ways, in that I always grew up wanting to be an engineer. I made my pivot right before I went to university, decided, okay, I don't want the career of an engineer. In hindsight, I didn't appreciate that I could study one thing and do something else, right? And certainly studying accounting isn't, the most rigorous academic exercise.
Sure.
But when I realized in 12th grade that I didn't want to study engineering, what I really took away from that moment is, wow, I always thought I wanted to be an engineer, and now I say I don't. So no matter what I pick, how do I know I'm right? And this is the first time I realized there's a discontinuity of self, right? Who I am in the future isn't who I am today. And as individuals, we can look backwards as who we were and say, yes, we were a different person 2 years ago or 5 years ago, and that was a different person than the person 5 years before that. But often people fail to be imaginative about who they will be, right? And if you really think about it, you won't be the same person you are today in the future, but the person you are today picks that goal that your future self is working towards, right? And it's important understanding, because you can influence the person you're going to become, though, right?
Absolutely. And actually, you bring a very good point about the personas that we create for ourselves and who we are and who we will be and who we were. And I think an important distinction to make is that you are not your job, you're not your career, you're not you're not you're not an engineer if you study engineer or an accountant. You should separate. You should be very clear that what you are is your thoughts and your habits, and how you apply your habits and your thoughts is it's your career, your job, your family. And so being able to make that distinction that you're not your job, because for many of us, our jobs, it's a huge part of who we are. It's a huge part of who I am. It's a huge part of who you are in your company, probably more than for me. And but at the end of the day, you have to recognize that Avilash is more than Tres Vista, and there's much more to Avilash than your work at Tres Vista. You have a family, you have friends, and there's a lot more to your life than that. And so the problem, if you tie who you are to your job or to any one thing, is that you are robbing yourself from controlling your own destiny, because you're putting your self-fulfillment in the hands of something that you can control, which is not a good recipe for success.
Another thing, obviously, being a partner of a private equity firm is a nice situation to be in. Being managing director of Vista is a nice situation to be in. But that journey, that J curve, that valley of despair, a lot of people don't survive it because of the emotional duress, right? And if you think about what it takes to get there, you need to have a minimum level of aptitude. You have to have a work ethic. Those things are often correlated to success academically as a junior professional. So people who are consistently successful are the ones who push themselves to these edges. How do they cope with failure? How did you cope with that failure, right? And being open to failing.
So I think it's a great question, and I have a couple of comments that I like to talk to you about. Number one is there's this great Michael Jordan commercial from the 90s where he talks about all these times that he was given the game time ball and he missed it, and he missed his shots and he missed his rebounds, and he talks all about his failures, and then he ends, and that's precisely why I succeed. And for those Game of Thrones enthusiasts out there, there's a very famous phrase that says, "Chaos is a ladder." Well, I like to think about failure being a ladder. Okay, and I think all of this that we're talking about, Abhilash, has to do with mindset. Yeah, and it kind of segues nicely from what I was just talking about before. If you see failure as something that it's a it's it if you see failure as something that it's rooted in you and something wrong with you, it's gonna weigh on you and it's gonna put a drag on you. Whereas if you see failure as an opportunity to learn, as an opportunity to reflect, and perhaps an opportunity to pivot, you will be able, you will be, you. I think that's it's really all a matter of your frame of mind when failure comes. There's no way, there's no way not to fail in this life. There's no way to do it. Anyone who hasn't failed hasn't tried anything new, right? That's what Einstein said. And so one of my other quotes and that I really like is a very powerful quote that I strongly believe in is, "You become what you think about." And so, of course, in your mind, you say, well, I want to be a billionaire, not a billionaire. But that's not really what you think about all the time. Think about all the things that you think about all the time, and think about how those thoughts have become actions and have become outcomes. And I think that mental hygiene is incredibly important, and being able to not think good thoughts because it's good luck, but think good thoughts because that's what's going to drive your behavior and drive the good outcomes. So to wrap it up, it's, in order to get through the emotional journey, you have to believe, okay, and you have to believe in what you're doing, you have to believe in yourself, you have to believe in your team, and you have to believe that the plans you laid out will take you there, even though there might not be exactly where you think you were going to be. When the pressure comes, you don't rise to the level, you rise to the level of your training. You heard that before? So that's why preparation, the right mindset, will ultimately drive the outcomes. We cannot, and I've said this a million times, you cannot have, you cannot change what happens to you, but you can change how you react to it.
Yeah, and I think thinking in the long term, having these long term goals, thinking about the J curve also helps put those failures in context, because it's not a failure if it's in the context of something bigger, right? A race is only won or lost at the finish line. Being behind in the first 100 meters of a 1,000-meter race doesn't mean anything, right? But if you think about it in each moment, right, then it gets very taxing. And I think they go hand in hand. Being able to think long term helps put these failures into perspective.
Absolutely. I would say one of the things that has helped me tremendously from a frame of mind in my career is the concept of being comfortable, being uncomfortable. You are a reader of my podcasts, I believe. And if you remember one, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, I had one that said, ironically, the moment you feel like an idiot or you feel dumb about something, you're at the same time becoming smarter about it. So that's the key right there. Whenever you're confronting something new, something where you're outside your comfortable zone, you're gonna feel like an idiot, you're gonna feel dumb, you're gonna feel frustrated. That is growth. Growth is pain. And be understanding that this is part of the journey will help you get through those tough times. If it's very easy, you're not pushing hard enough.
Most people aren't so cognizant about building new networks, right? It's easy to hang out with the people you know. And I had mentioned earlier, you can influence the person you will be. But the same is true of the people you surround yourself. How do you think about that? Who you've surrounded yourself, and how you get a support system to help you succeed on a long-term journey?
Yeah, so great point. Number one is, we all like to think about self-made individuals, but the reality is that almost no one in this world is quote unquote self-made. There's always been people along your journey that have helped you get there. And being surrounded with the right support network is incredibly important, from family to friends to co-workers to colleagues to mentors. Number two, it's been said that you are the combination of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Therefore, I think it's incredibly important that you think about who those 5 people are in your life, and you think about whether those 5 people are a good influence towards your goals and aspirations. And before we get too deep into these discussions, I think it's important to understand that there's different people for different situations. There's different people when it comes to, obviously, your nuclear family. There's your social aspect of your life, and then there's your professional life. But who you spend your time with will determine who you are. So I think it's incredibly important to have intent with who you spend your time with. I think it's also incredibly important, whatever you decide to do in life, to have the proclivity to develop networks of people that can be a center of influence to you. And I will tell you, I'm a natural introvert. Being on a crowd draws energy out of me, but I understood that that's a skill that I needed to develop. And I had the intent, and I thought what I needed to do. I took action, and now it's a big part of my job is to work a crowd, work a conference, walk the floor, and walk to someone I don't know and say, "Hi, my name is Leon. What's going on?" And so having the ability to network and having intent with who you surround yourself with is incredibly important towards your success.
Definitely. Maybe we transition a little bit now to what you actually do for a living, right? And we said you're now,
sure.
But a lot of the way you think about personal development and goal setting translates, very nicely into the specific career that you are in, right?
Sure.
It's like private equity investing, and specifically the type of private equity investing you're doing in the middle market, often investing in owner-operated businesses.
Sure.
Can you maybe talk about how you take this philosophy on life and apply it to your job and to private equity?
Yeah. I mean, to be honest with you, a lot of this a lot of the philosophy draws from the experience I've had at working at Palladium over the last, I think it's 15 and a half, 16 years. And look, I think that there is there's multiple aspects to my job, and one of the things I like about private equity is that you get to wear, no pun intended, many hats. And so let's talk about, as an investor, particularly in private equity, what are the 5 things that you need to do? You need to think about investment themes and areas where you want to spend time on. Then you need to develop networks and source opportunities. Then you need to underwrite and execute on those investments. Finally, you need to, well, not finally, you need to develop a value creation plan to grow your investment and make money for your investors. And lastly, you need to generate liquidity through dividends or sales. So those are the 5 basic building blocks of the private equity investor. And so over time, I thought about how to hone in on the necessary skills to succeed in each of those aspects. And naturally, when you're starting as a junior professional, the focus is really on supporting your team, and you're deep into the spreadsheet, deep into research, deep into presentation. And as you grow in your career, you become, the role, at least for me, has become much more outwardly, and being in front of business owners and trying to tell them why partnering with me and Palladium is better than the next private equity guy. And so that has been a very interesting journey of leaving the spreadsheet and going into the conference floor and understanding the ability to empathize, relate, and put yourself in the other person's shoes. It's what's given me the opportunity to sit in front of founders and understand what they're looking for, and see how our experience can not only translate to what they want, but also help them go to a place that they didn't think they could accomplish themselves. And at the end of the day, this is all about partnership. And I think that when people think about partnership, to me, the most important thing is sincerity and authenticity. And I think that my biggest selling card is being able to portray who I think I am, which is a sincere person, an authentic person, that I will tell you what I think, you will know what I know, and I will tell you whether or not I am the best person for what you're looking for. Case in point, I had a call with a founder yesterday on a business that I've been tracking for some years, and I love what they do. I love to invest in them. And we talked through what they wanted. And I said, look, I think we could be great partners with you, but given what you're going through right now, it probably makes sense to let you finish that before we engage. Because not because that's going to be best for me, that's actually against my self-interest, but because it's in his self-interest. And that in turn, it's what I think generates his interest on wanting to have a follow-up discussion, which we're scheduling right now.
Yeah. Again, I think even that approach you take to that conversation is long-term thinking in nature. Right?
Exactly.
Short-term, people are going to sense, and I think especially entrepreneurs who built businesses over years, right? Their timelines are long, right? So when you try to rush someone saying we got to do it this quarter versus next quarter, you're talking different languages, right? And there's a disconnect happens there.
Do you remember that Wear Sunscreen song by Baz Luhrmann?
Yeah.
And he talks about the race is long, and in the end, it's only with yourself. And I think, particularly in the finance community and people that work in this sort of high pressure jobs, there is a huge tendency to compare yourself to others. And there's this phrase that I like to use, which is life is comparables, right? But I think it's a very dangerous phrase. And let me tell you why. It's because at the end of the day, comparing yourself to others, particularly when it comes to your own personal development, will only make you unhappy. You will always tend to compare yourself to the 5% that is the super performers versus the bottom 95%, number one. And number two, the right comparison is to comparing yourself to yourself yesterday, right? Am I doing things better than I was doing yesterday? And am I working towards a better self tomorrow? And you asked earlier in the conversation, what's the key? And look, what I'm gonna say is much easier said than done, but I think that the key is discipline. Build a life of discipline. Wake up in the morning, go work out, do your bed, and if you're able to when I wake up in the morning, what I want to do is I want to keep sleeping. I don't want to wake up. I just want to keep resting, scrolling in social media. But if you're able to resist the urge of simply going for a walk, going for a run, doing some exercise, making your bed, and focus on discipline, you're gonna get addicted to that freedom, and that's what is gonna set you on the path to success. And that's something that I like to lead people with, which is, focus on discipline, because that's self-control, and that's what's going to take you. That's when it comes to the valley of despair, is the habits and the discipline that I'm going to carry you through.
Yeah, so maybe on the closing thoughts, just going back to this valley of despair, you in the early part of your career had experience with companies like Fannie Mae and Lehman, left them at the right time, but saw what happened, was in the financial crisis over your career. I started my career in the tech bubble, right? But for a lot of professionals who graduated just after the financial crisis, the current environment is the first real uh-oh moment that they're feeling. And a lot of these individuals now are not, junior professionals. They're taking leading roles in their organizations. And they might have succeeded and had success over the past 10 years. In part, markets were really good. It's really hard not to be successful if you're hardworking and smart. And this might be the first time people are kind of coming into the situation where, wait, what's happening? Interest rates can go up, and, valuations can crater, and there can be a recession. What advice would you give to people who are going through this for the first time?
Look, I I think I call this moment, for many people, this moment is going to be what I call the burn the ships moment. When Hernan Cortez came to the Americas, putting aside whether what he did was good or bad, which I think a lot of people have a lot to say about that, he burned the ships to tell his crew that the only way was forward. I think in these moments, Avilash, when things get tough, you are gonna at some point look at the abyss, and the abyss is gonna look back at you, and this is the moment where you're gonna see who you really are. You are not, when things go well and everything is great, that's not who you really are. Who you really are is how you react when things get tough, and when your training, your preparation, your discipline comes into play. So my advice to those people is to not rob themselves for this very pivotal and seminal moment that they may be about to go, and be present in the experience it and be present in the moment to make sure this could be the greatest learning opportunity that they've ever had.
Couldn't agree more. Well, Leon, this has been a wonderful conversation. I feel like I could just talk with you for the next several hours, but I think people have to get back to their job. But thank you again so much, Leon, for taking the time to share your thoughts with us.
Thank you for having me, and I hope to do more of this soon. Thank you, Avilash.